Hey everyone, it's Lynette Schaefer, and you are going to be listening to a little bit about dimming in this Controls Basic segment number 2. So we probably already know this, but dimming allows us to control the intensity of a light or the light source in the space, and it is really a great way to kind of set the mood or maybe just relax and unwind or wind down after dinner or maybe before bedtime. Now, incandescent technology, generally speaking, is pretty easy to dim, as most incandescents are dimmable out of the box, and they also work with many basic dimmers. Fluorescent technology isn't quite as easy because you need to make sure you are using a dimmable ballast, and it also requires a specific dimmer that is suitable specifically for fluorescent technology. HID is also not terribly easy for the same exact reasons as fluorescence. And when we get into LEDs, one of the biggest things you need to make sure of is that the LED is dimmable, because not all LEDs are. And also you need to confirm that if it is dimmable, it should clearly state whether it is triac or 0 to 10 volts. These two don't work, one versus the other. They have their purpose. So if your LED is triac dimmable versus 0 to 10 volt, you just need to make sure you understand that. Now, in a basic line voltage scenario, which we usually refer to as triac dimming, the ability to increase or decrease the light level happens by controlling the power to the light source. So the lower the power, obviously, the lower the light level. Together, voltage, which is the electric force, and current, which is the flow measured in amps, gives you electrical power. The bigger the voltage, the bigger the current, which means more power. Now, many people like this kind of dimming because it is simple. It is super easy to install. There's no extra wires required. It's been around for a very long time. And again, this type of scenario typically happens for the most part in residential type applications. So in triac dimming, because it is very common in residential applications and it's very easy to, this happens to be the most common type of dimming. However, triac dimming is actually part of something referred to as phase dimming, which I tend to refer to as line voltage. So basically with phase dimming, you have triac dimming. This is the most traditional way to dim both traditional incandescent lamps and also some LED incandescent replacement lamps. And then there's also a few fixtures that are actually also dimmable via triac. They're probably more fixtures that are suitable for like motels, hotels, residential type things. But anyways, triac dimmers specifically are also known as leading edge, and it does not require a neutral wire to be present. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Also part of phase dimming, there is something referred to as electronic low voltage, ELV is what we usually refer to this. And it's used to control low voltage transformers and are known as trailing edge or reverse phase. They are more common in commercial applications. There's no doubt about it. Now, ELV dimmers require a neutral wire to be present, which could be an issue because some older buildings may not have this. As I mentioned, there are typically 2 or 3 wire situations when you look at just basic wiring. The reason that people, it's important to understand if the neutral wire is there is because if it's not, then you have to do some wire pulling. It's not quite as easy to install. So if you want to use an ELV, you've got to make sure you've got the neutral wire there. If not, triac would be the simplest one to install. Now, the reason that people like ELV dimmers, even though they are definitely more expensive than triac, is because it provides a more smooth and flicker-free experience compared to triac. The reason for this is because these two types of technologies basically just have different switching characteristics. That's why it helps for a little bit better, smoother, flicker-free experience. Now, incandescents and LED light sources can be controlled by either forward or reverse phase. It just depends on the product. However, magnetic low voltage and electronic low voltage light sources can only be controlled by reverse phase or ELV dimmers. Now, besides forward phase dimming, light sources can also be dimmed via 0 to 10 volts, but that means 2 additional wires are required, which can be very costly if you think about it from an installation standpoint. Now, in this particular scenario, when the signal, when that signal is pushed or the dimmer is slid up and down in this particular example, when that signal goes out, it basically is sending a signal via those low voltage control wires. So when it comes to 0 to 10 volt, those low voltage control wires send a DC signal that varies between, say, 0 volts and 10 volts. Each value of voltage corresponds to a specific brightness level. So for example, 0 volts could correspond to turn the fixture off. 1 volt may correspond to dim the light down to 10%, and 10 volts may correspond to 100% light output. This is all up to how the driver is programmed from the manufacturer. It is not the same for every manufacturer. It all depends on the manufacturer. Now, just a quick little reminder, prior to January 2022, it used to be that these low voltage control wires were violet and gray, or some people would say purple and gray. Now the gray is actually replaced with pink. So just as a side note, it's very important to know that. Typically, when you look at fixtures, you will see if it's 0 to 10 volt, because coming out of the fixture, you'll actually see 2 additional wires that are now gray and pink. And then that's a pretty good giveaway that it's going to be 0 to 10 volt dimming. Now, the reason that people like 0 to 10 volt dimming is that many fixtures are now available with 0 to 10 volt drivers. And also it's been around for a very long time, and it's a really easy way to dim the light source, especially with LED technology. Now, dimming can be referred to as continuous dimming, dim to off, and step or bi-level dimming. Continuous dimming is when the intensity is smoothly raised or lowered and can be set at any level to maintain a constant light level. You may be using something like this in your home. This is the most common type of dimming and is accomplished through triac dimming, or it can also be accomplished through 0 to 10 volt dimming. As a side note, most standard 0 to 10 volt drivers for LED technology will only allow the intensity of that light source to go down to about 10% and never completely off. So usually in those cases, 10% may be okay. But if you have an application where you need it to go down to, say, 0.1% or 5%, there are drivers out there that will state specifically how low it will go down. But it is definitely a feature of the driver. In most cases, most drivers only go down to about 10%, and again, never completely off. That's basically another feature called dim to off, and it will be clearly identified on the driver or on the manufacturer spec sheets, whether or not that has a dim to off feature. Now, speaking of dim to off, if the driver, as I mentioned, features this, the dim to off feature, that means the intensity continuously decreases and the power will eventually shut off as you're dimming it, and it will go to a very, very low level. Now, an example of continuous dimming applications specifically for continuous dimming would be office building with natural light. Fixtures will continuously dim until they get to the correct light level and required for the space. Hospitality applications, commercial office buildings, places even using maybe something like daylight harvesting, that's where you're going to see continuous dimming. While dim to off, on the other hand, those are mainly used in theatrical settings, athletic fields, maybe a stadium or movie theaters where you really need to have it go completely to dark, especially in like theatrical settings for sure. Now, step dimming is different from dim to off and continuous dimming in the fact that step dimming is when the intensity jumps from one intensity to the next. So where would you see this? Well, it might be a stairwell. Stairwell may be programmed to be 50% when it's unoccupied, and then you want it to immediately jump to 100% when occupied. You could also maybe see this in an educational setting or maybe a conference room. Or one that's really important is, say, a warehouse when you have aisles and you have forklifts. As soon as that forklift enters the aisleway, you want it to jump to 100% intensity very, very quickly to turn those lights on immediately. So that's the difference between continuous dimming, dim to off, and step or bi-level dimming. Now, triac dimming, as a little summary here, uses standard wiring. 0 to 10 volt, of course, requires 2 extra wires, which we talked about. We have to remember that not all LED lamps and LED fixtures are dimmable, so don't forget that. And if it is dimmable, you need to confirm when it comes to LEDs if it's triac or if it's 0 to 10 volt. Additionally, the benefits of dimming is quite nice. You get a little bit more user friendliness. It gives the user to be able to control the light and kind of set that mood and ambiance that they're looking for. It can also increase the life of the lamps or the fixtures. Anytime that you reduce the amount of voltage going to the lamp, it will actually increase the life a little bit, which is kind of nice. And of course, it also reduces energy consumption. Of course, the reduced energy consumption comes from reducing the power that you're providing to that light fixture or that light source. And it also reduces the number of watts used. Dimmers are great for homes, as we talked about, hospitality, many commercial applications. Of course, when it comes to lighting design, a really critical point to kind of mention is that you need to fully understand, the situation as far as what type of, if you're doing a retrofit, if the neutral wire is there, can you incorporate ELV? If you're using 0 to 10 volt, can you run 2 extra wires? Is that going to be too costly? Those are the kind of things to think about from a lighting design perspective. But always remember, no matter what, when you start dimming, there's definitely energy savings, and it's really a great way to set the right ambiance too. I hope you enjoyed this lighting controls basics number 2. And if you have any questions, you can direct them to my attention at lynette.schaefer@eiko.com.